Today, we're joined by three panelists: Tanja Crk, who's the Urban Waters Federal Agency Coordinator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency; Dr. Shawn Fisher, who's a hydrologist and water quality specialist at the USGS New York Water Science Center; and Chantel Jimenez, Urban Wildlife Refuge Project Coordinator with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll hear from all three panelists before moving to the Q&A portion of the session, but feel free to add questions for our panelists in the chat, or you can hold your question to the end for the beginning of the Q&A session. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please be sure to specify who your question is for. Thanks to all of our panelists for joining us. Tanja, if you want to come on screen, I'll pass it off to you to start things off.
All right, thank you, Mia, Jordan, and Lisa Pellstring as well, and the USGS for this opportunity to speak with you today. It is my pleasure to represent the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Urban Waters Federal Partnership. My name is Tanja Crk, and I am the Urban Waters Federal Agency Coordinator. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman with long brown hair and black glasses, wearing a lit pink shirt. All right, so I'll begin explaining a little bit about the Urban Waters Partnership. The mission of the program is to reconnect urban communities, particularly those that are overburdened or economically distressed, with their waterways by improving coordination among federal agencies and collaborating with community-led revitalization efforts to improve our nation's water systems and promote their economic and environmental and social benefits. The overarching vision is to revitalize urban waters and the communities that surround them, transforming overlooked assets into treasured centerpieces and drivers of urban revival. To explain the partnership more visually, the graphic on the right depicts the dual purpose of it in a synergistic, virtuous cycle of improving environmental conditions and revitalizing communities. One purpose is the ecological component, which includes improvements in water quality, habitat restoration, and other environmental benefits. And the second purpose is a social component, which includes the community revitalization, engagement, environmental justice, access to resources, and environmental education. Since its establishment in 2011, with 9 federal agencies and 7 pilot locations, the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program has grown to over 15 federal agencies, working in 21 locations, welcoming Walnut Creek from Raleigh, North Carolina in 2023, which was the most recent. The Urban Waters Federal Partnerships are located across the continental U.S. and in Puerto Rico. Partnerships work with all municipalities in their watershed. Over 900 Urban Waters partners include mostly government agencies at the federal, state, and local levels, as well as nonprofits. The remaining network of partners includes private entities, academic institutions, and tribes. These partners also include community-based organizations and the Urban Waters ambassadors, those who wear many hats but are essentially managing the partnership efforts at their respective locations. This large network of active, robust, and valued local partners provides expertise on local priorities, challenges, and resources. This collaborative, committed partnership approach enables the Urban Waters Federal Partnership to support and shepherd complex projects over many years and see them through from beginning to end. These Urban Waters partnerships have fostered inclusive and equitable hazard mitigation planning and climate adaptation projects through a commitment to enabling the local community vision. A community-first convening strategy ensures that stakeholders are partners in efforts to mitigate, adapt, and build resilience, and that their priorities remain on the forefront throughout the process, and that their expertise are at the centerpiece of climate solutions. For 2022, Urban Waters drafted a progress report, which is slated for publication in late April or early May this year. This report is the second in a series of progress reports that will detail the specific program achievements at the federal and local levels. The goal of this report is to provide a high-level snapshot of some key projects and programmatic achievements of the urban waters locations. The progress report for 2022 highlights that the urban waters federal partnership locations created nearly 200 job training opportunities. They completed nearly 100 projects that included planting nearly 30,000 native trees and plants, protecting or restoring nearly 33,000 acres of habitat, and collecting nearly 30,000 pounds of trash. And that's among many other achievements. Overall, there are three key elements contributing to the success of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. The first is the federal agency network that's supporting community priorities at each location. The second are the ambassadors who lead and coordinate activities at each location. And the third is the Urban Waters Learning Network that promotes collaboration, peer networking, and continued education across the Urban Waters program. And I will talk a little bit more about that network in a bit. So I'm pivoting now more closely to the theme of this symposium. I would like to highlight 4 Urban Waters national level initiatives that support urban climate resilience. We recognize that climate change is impacting communities, particularly those that are underserved or overburdened, and we are working to address that impact. So the first highlight is the EPA's Equitable Climate Resilience Builder tool, which was developed by EPA's Office of Research and Development. This tool provides a blueprint for equitable climate resilience planning. The Urban Waters Equitable Climate Resilience White Paper is being drafted by EPA's Urban Waters team, and it is about how the Urban Waters Partnership approach contributes to equitable climate resilience. The white paper is expected for publication in late April or early May. Now back to the network. The Urban Waters Learning Network is a partnership between Groundwork USA and River Network. It is funded by EPA in cooperation with the National Park Service, the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. The Learning Network is a peer-to-peer group of urban waters practitioners across the United States that includes federal partners, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and others. Members of the Learning Network focus on restoration, resilience, and environmental justice initiatives in urban river work. This learning network is also a tool that builds capacity and brings people together, demonstrating the outcome of a long-term investment in partnerships. The network offers opportunities for people to learn more and talk about challenges, share successful examples, how to do work with NGOs, how to do equitable climate planning across the country. Thus, this learning network is a resource hub and a learning forum for urban waters partners and includes resources specific to climate resilience planning, such as the 6-part webinar series that was recorded monthly from last July up until January this year, and a story map of community solutions for urban flood resilience. I highly encourage folks to access these 2 resources to learn more. Lastly, the Urban Waters Resilience Workgroup is a recently established team at EPA headquarters made up of federal agency partners whose charge is to support urban waters locations with technical and financial assistance on climate resilience projects. As a first step, we are establishing a baseline of local level resilience efforts across the 21 urban waters partner locations. Now, as a separate but related EPA-led effort that this audience may want to explore is the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative, or GIFC. This is intended to specifically support nature-based solutions projects. In addition, this collaborative seeks to facilitate strategies that foster climate resilience and encourage the equitable implementation of green infrastructure in all communities. I will spend the remainder of my presentation on the first 2 efforts, the Builder and the White Paper. So back to the Builder, the Equitable Resilience Builder, or ERB, was developed to support communities in equitable resilience planning by providing instructions and activities to prioritize community engagement techniques, equity assessment, root cause analysis, and more. Here are these guides on building within communities, using local data, recognizing trauma, facilitating actions, providing access for under-resourced communities, and adapting to user-specific contexts. The ERB is organized into 5 sections: plan, engage, assess, strategize, and move forward. Users walk through each of these 5 sections, which contain steps of planning a project, such as how to set goals and assemble a core team, broadening engagement by mapping community networks, and reducing barriers to participation. Then assessing resilience needs through participatory activities like storytelling, mapping, and indicators, strategizing an action plan, and taking some implementation steps like monitoring progress and sharing results more widely. Results can be used to collaboratively prioritize actions to build community resilience in an equitable way. Now, as an example, the ERB was used to gather feedback from the Urban Waters Grand Rapids locations community partners on how to build equity into their Lower Grand River watershed resilience plan through several community workshops. Further details about that case study in Grand Rapids are available in the story map for the community. The ERB was made fully publicly accessible in October last year. I encourage folks to download that tool from the landing page and explore the many available resources, guides, and templates that are contained in it. For general inquiries, you may send an email to cr@epa.gov. But for coaching on the tool or for further information, you may send an email to Emily Eisenhower, who is a social scientist at EPA and who developed the tool, or to Raven Nee, who is an ORISE research fellow supporting Emily, also at EPA. Now, on to the white paper. The Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program provides a template of consistent, equitable federal engagement with local partners and many examples of multi-jurisdictional groups working together to build solutions. The Urban Waters Equitable Climate Resilience White Paper identifies 4 critical lessons learned from over 10 years of Urban Waters Federal Partnership work. Those 4 lessons are outlined in this slide, and I will walk through examples among the Urban Waters Partnership locations for each lesson for the remainder of my presentation. So the first lesson, this is the authority and convening power of federal agencies that helps attract and sustain the participation of key stakeholders and funding. An example of this convening power includes the Greater Philadelphia area and Delaware River watershed that includes 4 cities: Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey, Chester, Pennsylvania, and Wilmington, Delaware. A major challenge of encompassing 4 major urban areas in the Delaware location is a large watershed and the diverse communities within the study area. The Delaware River watershed is thus established the Delaware Community Fund's Urban Waters Mini Grant Program to support those communities while also exemplifying an effective Urban Waters federal partnership approach. The Delaware Urban Waters Mini Grants are targeted to address specifically environmental justice issues such as water quality and stormwater control, and support solutions such as green infrastructure, living shorelines, pollinator gardens, and tree planting. Through this mini grants mechanism, the Delaware River Watershed Urban Waters Federal Partnership location annually distributes financial assistance up to $10,000 for local partners working on greening and environmental projects in urban communities. The second lesson is consistent coordination across a wide range of activities that maintains continuity of focus over time. Urban Waters Federal Partnership and the Heartland Conservation Alliance have partnered together for over a decade to protect, connect, and restore the Blue River for the benefit and enjoyment of all people in Kansas City, Missouri. The flagship project on the Blue River is the Blue River Greenway, which seeks to connect Johnson County, Kansas to Jackson County, Missouri, with a 43-mile corridor of ecological protection along the river. The leadership and consistency of the Heartland Conservation Alliance and the Urban Waters Federal Partnership pulls together multiple organizations and governmental jurisdictions to protect areas along the river. In addition to improving water quality and flood management, the Greenway project will contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gases to reach 2050 targets through the protection of floodplain woodlands and increased tree cover. To date, Heartland Conservation Alliance has secured $8 million toward implementation of the Greenway project. The third lesson is the ability to engage and convene key partners who bring technical expertise, garner resources, build capacity of organizations, and develop useful information for decision-making. Since its formation in 2011, the Patapsco Urban Waters Federal Partnership serves as a convening space for stakeholders and technical experts to collaborate on challenges in the watershed. This location is led by the USDA Forest Service Baltimore Field Station and supported by the ambassador at the University of Maryland Cooperative Extension. The Still Meadow Community Fellowship is a small church that became a community resiliency hub and a community touchpoint following the 2018 flooding in Irvington, Maryland. Now, Community Resiliency Hub is a Baltimore City initiative aimed at supporting and better provisioning community organizations so that in the event of a flood, under-resourced communities are better prepared to respond. By 2023, 5 years after the flooding, Still Meadow received a $2 million grant from the Forest Service for a community peace park. The grant supported the creation of green space in the area for future flood mitigation and forestry education. Now, the final and fourth lesson is trust and relationship building that engenders stakeholders' willingness to invest time and energy in the collaboration. An example comes from the Caño Martin Peña, or CMP, which is a 3.75-mile tidal channel that runs through the urban center of San Juan, connecting San Juan Bay and San Jose Lagoon. It has faced intense pollution and regular flooding. It's also densely populated with underserved communities that live adjacent to these waterways. Two community-based organizations had thus emerged with support from the Puerto Rican government to address the infrastructure improvement need. They are ENLACE, which stands for Engaging Latino Communities for Education, and Cantera, or a company for the integral development of the Cantera Peninsula. Now, after an initial grant support from the Urban Waters Federal Partnership in 2011, the Caño Martin Peña location was officially designated in 2013. The partnership brought these two public corporations together with the main intent to bolster the work already being done in the community and to further elevate local priorities. The partnership has worked to bring together groups like ENLACE and Cantera, among others, to foster a structure for coordination and improve access to resources. This work helps transform community-led initiatives into implementable work plans and provide structure and resources to community efforts in order to ensure they receive the support needed to advance projects. And this is my concluding slide. For additional information about Urban Waters, please visit our webpage. If you have any questions, please email me. My email is crk.tanja@epa.gov. And I want to put a plug in for River Rally, which is happening in May 13th through the 16th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a national conference for river and water champions that's hosted by the River Network. EPA co-sponsors and attends this annual event. So hope to see you there. Thanks.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present some of our Urban Waters Federal Partnership projects and share a bit about our USGS Urban Landscapes Capability Team. My name is Shawn Fisher. I'm a hydrologist with the New York Water Science Center. And along with my colleague Pam Riley of the New Jersey Water Science Center, we lead the capability team to work with USGS scientists around the country, coordinate, collaborate on important urban-related topics. For this presentation, I'll share some examples of the Urban Waters and ULCT projects, some of which were not necessarily initiated to study climate effects, but nonetheless can be useful for developing a baseline of current conditions for issues like bacterial contamination, stormwater management, which are projected to continue to factor into urban planning and climate changes. I'll start with two examples from the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, the Bronx and Harlem River watershed location here in New York. Since the onset of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Initiative in 2011, which Tanja covered nicely in the previous presentation, USGS has been a co-lead in the location, and along with EPA Region 2, has worked closely with community organizations in the city of New York to align our science mission with the needs of an underserved community. Being the Federal Bureau's mission is to provide high quality and unbiased data supporting decision makers by monitoring the waterways and assessing green infrastructure, means more members of the community can have access to their natural resource through shoreline redevelopment and pollution diversion projects. 2017, with a proposal from New York Congressman Serrano, USGS Cooperative Matching Fund program directed a portion of its funding specifically to support work from our centers, the water science centers that are doing with the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. That afforded my colleagues and I the opportunity to support community projects in revitalizing the shoreline of the Harlem River, an 8-mile tidal strait that separates Manhattan from the Bronx and connects the Hudson River to the East River. By assessing a range of conditions related to stormwater runoff, green infrastructure, and elevated bacteria in the rivers. I'll focus briefly on microbiological assessment that started by looking at comparing data routinely collected at a single point along the Harlem River as part of a harbor survey conducted by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. You see location H3 here on the map, along with some of the other locations we were sampling for this effort. So a bit of data. In close collaboration with the EPA Region 2 office and the Interstate Environmental Commission, USGS collected samples along river transects following a period of wet weather. We did this 3 times. I'm showing one example of that here. We had 6 locations from which samples were collected along a transect, where we had east, center, and west along the shore. And for context, Enterococcus is a bacteria, an indicator bacteria by which swimming regulations are regulated. And for CFU are colony forming units, and they're measured per 100 milliliters of a water sample. This sample from August 2019 was a routine event. We started collecting at the confluence of the Hudson River, working our way south. And we noticed that as a large vessel went by, it churned up a lot of water and suspended a lot of sediment, which when we got our results back, we found created an elevated bacteria concentrations along the shorelines, which led us to the following year going and along with our cooperators at the Interstate Environmental Commission, looking at shoreline resuspension of the bacteria and related to individual boat wakes. So we targeted a single vessel that we knew goes by daily, and we waited at 4 locations along the shore. Each shoreline had different conditions representative of of undeveloped riprap area, bulkhead area, and floating docks. And what we found was, and you'll see that the y-axis changed to E. coli, which is another indicator. And this time it's in most probable numbers per 100 milliliters of water. You'll see that prior to a boat passage, we saw a baseline amount of bacteria was around 100 or so MPN. After the boat went by, immediately after around 2 minutes passed, when water is settled enough and safe enough to sample, you could see the concentrations of the water shot up. Now, these samples were collected under non-storm conditions with antecedent wet weather, not totaling more than 1/4 inch prior to. And then subsequent samples, you see the started to return back to baseline after 15 and then 30 minutes post-wake. We also sampled and looked at the correlation between total suspended solids, which is a combination of mineral sediments and organic matter that would be suspended in the water and can be related to wastewater, such as CSO, combined sewer outfall overflows, or natural reoccurrence of suspended sediment along the shoreline. And you'll see from a log scale on the left, on the y-axis, and a normal scale on the x-axis, we see somewhat of a pattern emerge for elevated concentrations of bacteria and total suspended solids. So with that, this led us to continuous monitoring of turbidity and water level in subsequent years, again, supported by the Directed Cooperative Matching Funds, to look at whether high frequency changes in water level, it led us to monitoring at high frequency water levels and turbidity to assess the bacteria resuspension related to these events. So in this case, we started collecting discrete samples from the bulkheaded area of Roberto Clemente State Park, while simultaneously measuring water level, temperature, turbidity, and salinity. The following year, we deployed a novel in situ microbiological sampler and analyzer. And between the two data sets, we were able to track and sample during water, high frequency water level events, such as a boat wake or a windstorm. After collecting years worth of data, we were able to release the data to the public, as is our mission, and use the data to help inform future uses of shoreline floating docks and projects related to redevelopment. I'm going to shift now to the Bronx River, where several studies supported by the USGS Directed Cooperative Matching Funds have allowed us to work with community groups and the city to assess sources of bacteria, microplastics, and add continuous water quality monitoring to our Bronx River stream gauge. The most recent project I'll focus on today is stormwater contamination source modeling, a newly funded effort that leverages ongoing modeling related to coastal flooding from large storms by colleagues here in the New York Water Science Center. From the map, you can see the sampling locations from previous studies, as well as the location of the Bronx River gauge and corresponding site ID if anyone is interested in viewing the data on our Water Data for the Nation webpage. The initial modeling effort for the Bronx will assess influence from green infrastructure and how they could reduce stormwater contaminants from reaching the river. The New York City DEP has initiated an effort to implement green infrastructure throughout the city. And in the Bronx alone, there are over 500 green infrastructure installments. A majority of these are infiltration basins, concrete tops, bioswales, and rain gardens. A unique challenge in older urban cities is the combined sewer system that diverts stormwater and generates overflows under conditions that are not necessarily indicative of landscape or topography. Modeling will encompass the entire Bronx River watershed, which is roughly 115 square kilometers. As of now, the only active stream gauge in the Bronx is the Bronx River gauge, from which stream flow data can be used as an input. Other attributes beyond green infrastructure layers include the combined sewer outfalls and storm sewer outfalls, impoundments and weirs, and points where historical data exist. After running an assessment tool for the Bronx River watershed, there'll also be an attempt to model the Harlem River watershed by our colleagues on the Bronx side. However, the stormwater conveyances and landscapes along the Harlem side pose a unique challenge to the tool. I've been talking about the model in general, and I'm not a modeler, but I would like to take a moment to show how a quick diagram highlights the soil and water assessment tools, inputs and outputs. The SWAT Plus model was developed by Texas A&M University and the USDA. It was developed to simulate conditions related to water quality and quantity based on factors related to land use, geography and geology, and climate change. And while initially developed for agricultural basins, the tool has since been updated to incorporate urban runoff as a point and non-point source pollution within the watersheds. Relevant outputs for our current study are nutrient loads to rivers and estuary. But the SWAT function can also allow for bacteria and suspended sediments to be modeled, which correspond to previous studies and can be used to estimate how bacteria concentration would change should climate model predictions hold true, which would in turn result in additional combined sewer overflows, which would further impact the waters around vulnerable communities. In particular, it leads us to the data sources and inputs that are part of this modeling exercise. Climate-related data sets such as NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information repository, and as well as our Bronx River gauge data will be used to train the model along with the related river and watershed water quality data. Subsequently, projected precipitation values can be used to estimate increases in anticipated loads and tweak the proposed green infrastructure projects to see how those may make a difference in these areas. So I do want to take a second here to say that we really appreciate the shout out to the Urban Landscapes Capability Team from Director Applegate, taking a larger look at studies and monitoring the urban areas. Our USGS colleagues from around the country are engaged in exciting work that can be directly correlated to climate science, research, and modeling from a water quality and quantity perspective, particularly in coastal communities with the threat of rising sea level. USGS Urban Landscapes Capability Team serves as a resource to assist USGS science centers in developing regional science programs that provide technical support impact of urban development and water resources and ecosystems. So as we started in the Northeast, we've expanded throughout the country with colleagues all over the country to develop a technical vision for new urban water science and decision-making tools. We build network and expertise within the USGS Urban Science Program, develop expertise in effects of climate change and natural disasters. We interface regularly with other federal agencies through the Urban Waters Federal Partnership and through local and interstate projects. And of course, we support the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. So several of these projects I'd like to highlight. The first one from our colleague, Chrissy Hopkins, down in the South Atlantic Water Science Center. And her paper on this topic can be found at this URL, Understanding the Effects of Watershed Scale Distributed Stormwater Control on Stream Health. In her study, it has the understanding of effects of a high density infiltration focused stormwater management practice and stream functions. They monitored watersheds and included forested watersheds, an urban control watershed, and 3 suburban treatment watersheds. The stormwater practices provide improvements to multiple stream conditions, and including to hydrology and bio conditions. However, past land use practices had played a role in nutrient reductions. Another study by Aaron Porter in West Virginia Water Science Center at the Hampton Roads Regional Stormwater Monitoring Program. His data represented the Hampton Roads region and was used to compute nutrient and sediment loads. The data filled a gap in the Chesapeake Bay watershed model for urbanized coastal plain. The results will be used to develop an average annual load for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment in the region. And the results will also be used to describe spatiotemporal patterns in loads resulting from land use, urban hydrology, seasonality, natural landscape features. Lastly, I'll sharing our colleague Bill Selbig's work from the Upper Midwest Water Science Center. This is pretty cool, and it overlaps with the NGWAS program, where we're looking at urban flood detection and warning and building a future resilience. And this can be directly tied to changing climate, where we're monitoring conditions now, and as precipitation increases and flooding is anticipated to increase. So this Sentinel network of Internet of Things sensors and flood detectors, they use low cost and low power sensor networks in an area prone to flooding. These are generally designed for urban areas where there are a lot of buildings in the way, where direct line of sight is not as feasible with tall buildings, trees, cars, etc. The display of real-time data is on an online dashboard. Automatically sends alerts to response team before a threshold is breached, which is important for anticipating floods and getting people out of harm's way. And it can trigger other actions based on these sensors data. So I want to thank Mia and Jordan for the opportunity to present this afternoon. And if you have any questions related to any of our work, you can reach out to Pam or myself, and our emails are here.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak today about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Urban Wildlife Conservation Program. My name is Chantel Jimenez. I use she, her pronouns. And I am sitting in San Diego, and I right now am acting National Program Coordinator for the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program. So excited to spend some time with you. So in 2011, the National Wildlife Refuge System developed a strategic plan sort of to determine how we were going to remain relevant to future conservationists, future demographics of what the United States is moving to, urbanization of our country, and knowing that some of our traditional audiences, hunters, fishermen, those populations and people engaging in those activities were declining. So out of that came Recommendation 13, which was an initiative to do two things. One, to develop an urban refuge initiative targeting diverse and historically excluded communities in urban areas, knowing that that is where 80% of Americans live now. And then looking at like, okay, if we want to work in urban areas where we generally have not, how do we define excellent? How do we do it in a way that really engages our audiences in meaningful connections to the outdoors? And how do we be very intentional in the work that we do in these urban areas for the communities that are living in those, knowing that when people thrive, wildlife thrive too. So that was Recommendation 13. And from that came our Urban Wildlife Conservation Program. It is a major element of our effort to engage local and historically underserved communities in ways that benefit the outcome of the communities. We have more than 100 national wildlife refuges across the United States, all within 25 miles of city centers. And we also recognize that a lot of our national wildlife refuges are not located in urban areas. So how do we create partnership programs with communities in urban areas to increase and improve access to natures and the outdoors? Really focusing in how we take our conservation messages to the people in urban centers. The program works to foster long-term partnerships with systemically marginalized communities to address the racial inequities in wildlife conservation. The National Wildlife Refuge System and the Migratory Birds Program strategically allocates $8.7 million a year to scale local solutions at the broader national level. The Fish and Wildlife Service is committed to evaluating our progress to ensure that we are strategic and adaptive. This is an opportunity really to learn how we engage in communities that we have not engaged with in the past. And then how do we scale those up throughout the service? We evaluate the ways that we can be collaborative, inclusive, intentional, and community focused to improve engagement and program delivery in our efforts in urban stations. And from that, we've learned quite a bit. And we've learned that we needed to sort of think about the ways that we engage in these urban areas a little different than we have in the past. And from that came what we're calling the standards of excellence for community engagement. And there are 8 standards of excellence originally developed for urban communities, but we identified, and our current director has said that the tenets of these standards are universal in the way that we engage with any community, whether it's urban or rural, whether it's a community that you work with, a community that shares maybe the same culture. It's not just a demographic community. And these 8 standards are the framework for how we work with our communities. No one relating to your community, really understanding the cultures, understanding the people that live there. What is it that they connect? How is it that they connect with nature? How do they see their place in the greater context of nature? Building partnerships, knowing that we want to broaden the audience that we engage with and look at the communities that we haven't in the past. And so what kind of partnerships can we create and really build to reach audiences that typically may not trust the federal government? Equitable access. Not everybody has access to nature. And in urban areas, especially, just minor green spaces really have an impact on overall health of that community. So how do we ensure that those kind of opportunities, very much so what the other presenters have spoken to about redlining, are available for all? Ensure long-term resources. That strategic investment that the Fish and Wildlife Service has been doing in these urban areas, really, we don't want to come in and work with a community partner and give them $10,000 and then walk away. We know that for the community to really be engaged and to build trust with that community, we need to ensure long-term resources. And resources could be just dollars, or it could also be the Fish and Wildlife Service staff time. It could be resources in terms of meeting spaces and opportunity to use facilities on refuges, or leaning on the resources that we have as a federal government to provide them with things that they may not have access to. B, community assets. This one is really focusing at, instead of us coming to the community saying, we're the expert, how can we help you? It's just sitting and listening to what the community has already identified as what their needs are and how we can help them, and learn from them. I think that one is really critical for the success of our urban program, is being able to recognize that how people connect to nature and how we view nature is not always the same. So how can we come and be an asset for them? Ensure people feel safe and welcome. So we really think that, these urban refuges that we have throughout the country provide opportunities to get outdoors, but we have to ensure that these places are safe and that they are welcoming to all cultures and all people that want to come out and have access to nature. So what does that look like? And how is it that they engage outside so we can be more equitable, and then people feel safe and want to come and visit the refuges? Stepping stone of engagement. This, really focuses on providing opportunities and meeting people where they are in terms of their relationship with nature, whether it's outdoors, for picnicking with the family. I grew up in Los Angeles, and visiting Griffith Park with my family was how I connected with nature. And it was the way that I then moved into the career I have now, fishing opportunities, to hunt. But it was those, steps along the way. So recognizing that many people aren't just going to be able to have the resources and then go do hunt and fishing opportunities. So what other kind of opportunities or stepping stones can we engage with them in the outdoors? And lastly, as the Fish and Wildlife Service, looking at model sustainability, what we do on our lands and what we learn from the things that we do on lands, how can we model that for others as we work with communities that are facing flooding issues, climate change, sea level rise? How can we learn the things that we do on our federal lands and then work with communities to do that in the private sector or within the places that they live? So this is the really important piece of the urban wildlife conservation program, and how we work with communities. And then it drives the projects and it drives the relationships that we have with these urban areas, so that then we can be the community asset and really engage them in the things that they want us to support them in. So that's for me. Thank you very much.
So much to all of our wonderful speakers. That was awesome. I learned so much. So now we're going to move into the question and answer portion, and we've got about a little less than 15 minutes to do our question and answers. The way this is going to work is you can either ask questions aloud, and to do that, please use the raise hand feature at the top of your screen. Once you raise your hand, I'll call on people and turn on your mic and your camera to allow you to ask the questions. You can also ask questions through the chat using the chat function also at the top of your screen. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everybody. Okay, and now we're going to start with a question that came from the chat. So Tanja, can you provide more context regarding the mini grants? What kinds of outcomes are recipients typically expected to have with the amount of money that's provided?
So I had also looked it up, looked at the request for funds, and I provided the overarching webpage about that in the chat for people to access and take a look. What I'm seeing is that A lot of these projects should address environmental justice issues, as mentioned before, that habitat, water quality, stormwater, public access to water and the outdoors. The other question came up about was $10,000. Would that seem like a little bit of money? But it seems like they are, looks like they were requesting funds or applications by July 7th, and the projects would have to be completed, I guess, within a year or less than a year time. So that seemed like an amount that could be used in that time frame for some of these projects.
Thank you so much. We have an audience question. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing people's names. This is going to be from Cimbria. And let me allow your mic and allow you camera.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you. This is really tremendous. I'm wondering how we can get the money into the hands of the smaller organizations that don't have the capacity. They haven't been receiving grants for a dozen years, or they have other barriers to getting some of this funding, rather than having it trickle down through these larger organizations. Some of these culturally appropriate organizations can be getting the money. Thank you.
So I guess I can answer with respect to the Urban Waters Partnership. We have ambassadors working on the ground with communities, and they are actually also responsible for obtaining funds for certain projects. So they're the ones, kind of the liaison between some of the federal agencies and the funding mechanisms that are available and the communities themselves. So they're assisting with some of that.
And I know that the Fish and Wildlife Service just recently lifted up what they call a small grants program. So anything under 100K, they put together a group of people through the Division of Conservation Investments, which used to be WISFR, Wildlife and Sport Fisheries Restoration, to work with the nonprofits in getting their DUNS number, an ASAP number, going through the whole federal hoops that you have to jump through to get money. So there's now a small team put together that will work with the identified smaller nonprofit that generally doesn't have like a CFO to do those steps, to then be able to work with maybe someone like myself who's a project officer on what that scope of work looks like, instead of the expectation of that small nonprofit figuring it out on their own. So that just was launched this fiscal year.
So what are you doing to advertise that and market it? How are you getting the word out to non-traditional fora for people who aren't already in the loop? I mean, we've got to go the extra mile to really make this information available. And the technical assistance is tremendous. That's great. Thank you.
I'll just speak. I know that what we've been doing is, on refuges, we've hired a lot more. We haven't hired a lot, but we've hired more community engagement specialists. And so we have gone out into the community to work with these smaller nonprofits. And once we see the opportunities then to work with them, we engage them in that conversation. So it's more build partnership piece as we start to bring together like a collective impact group of individuals and nonprofits to identify what opportunities are available.
Thank you
so much. Now we're going to go to Relinda, and I am allowing your mic, allowing your camera. You're welcome to come on camera or mic.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this so far. I have a question for Urban Water. My question is, you guys are pushing for equitability in these park spaces and urban, whether it be an urban wildlife refuge or the traditional wildlife refuge. And traditionally, I feel like the animals or the species that dwell in these and occupy these areas have kind of, not kind of, but have been the highlight of the most care. And so in recent years, I see a lot of push to create that equitability for people to be in these spaces and to thrive and benefit from either whether it's the nature and healing in nature, or utilizing this space to involve and indulge themselves in fishing or kayaking or anything that a wildlife refuge may offer. And I think that's absolutely excellent and appropriate. And so my question for you today is, how are you measuring equitability? Is that something that you all are defining, or are you providing the opportunity for the community and surrounding communities with an S to help to provide and create a base for? Because what is equitable to you may not be equitable to me. While how you want to use your park might not be the way that I want to use a park space. Me, I'm a Black Indian here on America. This is my territory, it's my land. So if I go out to the redwood forest, for example, and it's a whole entire loop around a tree, you know, that my ancestors been here, you know, and they're saying I can't touch a tree, that's one thing. Versus also, I want to go outside, I want to listen to music. You know, I want to be able to cook out, you know, I want to eat, I want to be loud. Okay. So what are you all doing to come into this new era and the reality of creating spaces and equity and creating access? Thank you.
I guess I'll take that one. And thank you for that, because I think you make a very poignant point. And so the work that I'll put on my San Diego hat here, the way that we look at the equity lens in the way that people engage with nature and want to be in the outdoors, we recognize that there's a suite of what people, you have the bird watchers that'll do it in the morning with the binoculars, very quiet, to moms who drop off the kids in the mornings and want to go on a hike to get some exercise, to then, you know, a group of 15 people who just want to get together and barbecue and be outdoors. And so my view is that equity is that everyone should have that opportunity to do what they feel like is appropriate and they want to do in the outdoors. Is that appropriate on all national wildlife refuges? No. Is it appropriate? So my view is that we need to provide that opportunity for everybody in sort of urban areas, so that if you want to go and barbecue and have an outdoor experience, you know, maybe that's a city park experience, and we have to make sure that city park is safe and welcoming for that group of individuals that go out there.
How are you measuring this? How are you measuring this?
So for our program, to measure it and to do it, we have 12 community organizations that we work with that all provide different access. Some may be recreational access for those that don't have opportunities to go surfing, kayaking. So to measure it, we do it through community organizations that are able to clearly identify and be very intentional in the communities that they serve, and based on what that community is telling that nonprofit, be able to provide those opportunities for those community members. So the way that we're able to measure it is by targeting the communities that we want to serve and listening to those communities for them to tell us what they want to do, and then providing the resources for those nonprofits to serve those communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, would love to talk more, Rolinda, if you want to reach out. We do have an evaluator that we've hired as part of our program to measure these as well, outcomes of and impact of our program.
Thank you so much. We still have 3 minutes left of our question and answer session. Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists? Leah, do you have another question? Allow mic. Allow camera.
Thank you. If others aren't going to ask questions, I wanted to leave the space, but what Rolinda said is so important, because that's been an issue. The city I live in, Utica, New York, just received an urban forest grant. And we want to bring permaculture in. I'm a permaculture designer, and they have to have the project managed by a traditional arborist, even though the arborist also wants to do permaculture. And so there's just so many limitations to traditional grant making, where communities can't actually do the work that they want to do that's going to reflect their culture and their way of being. And that's really been a block for so long. I see it starting to open up, but many of the grants I've seen do not respond to that. And I really want to make sure that you guys are listening to Rolinda and putting this into your designs going forward. I want to support Rolinda. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I'm taking the floor, Shawn or others, if anyone wants to step up. So what I didn't go into the weeds about is the way that the refuge system has decided to invest in these urban areas is they increased our base funding. So there's 8 flagship urban refuges. Each flagship urban refuge got an increased base of $1 million. And they said, go do good things within the urban area, and how you use it is up to the refuge. And all of us are doing it a little bit different. And so I'll just wear our SoCal hat. The way we do it is we give about 820,000 of that $1 million out to the community partners, and not unrestricted through grant solutions, but we work collaboratively with those nonprofit organizations to identify, like what Rolinda was getting to, was like, what is it that nonprofit needs to do their goals, and how do those goals align with what our urban refuge is trying to do with get more individuals outside. And so I don't want to, they're cooperative agreements in the way that we are engaging with them, but they really drive what their, how they use those funds. It's very unrestricted. There's no match requirement. There's no X number of dollars needs to be put by putting trees in the ground. There's no limit on how much money can go to salaries or not. It is sort of real collaborative in the sense of like, how do we make this work for your organization to meet our mutual goals and outcomes?
And I'll just stop because I know the others are there, but I do want to say, you know, if you've got the cooperative extensions doing this work, I can tell you they are not in the communities that they need to be in. I love the cooperative extensions. Whenever I move to a state, I get in touch with them right away, but they're not reaching these Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. They're just not, because of the capacity and because of the lack of trust. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you
so much. This was wonderful. At this point, I'm going to invite Mia to come back on. I think she's going to tell us we can go take a break.
Yeah, thanks everyone, to all of our presenters and to the audience for asking such great questions and engaging us in a rich discussion. Thanks again to all of our panelists, and we'll see everyone back here shortly.